Welcome to the channel. I know many of you listen to these videos to relax or fall asleep, and I'm really glad you're here. Before we start today's crime stories, please take a moment to subscribe if you haven't already. And if there's any crime story you'd like me to narrate for you, feel free to request it in the comments section. Now let's begin. Story 1. Janine Jones was born in Texas in July 1950. She was adopted as a baby by Richard Jones and his wife Gladys. The family lived in the San Antonio area. Richard Jones was a businessman who owned a nightclub called the Kit Kat Swim Club. Young Janine helped her father paint signs and put up advertisements around town. Janine attended John Marshall High School in San Antonio. She worked in the school library. The librarian later remembered that Janine was different from other students. She was bossy with other kids. She had little patience for typical teenage games and jokes. Even though Janine had a good relationship with her parents, she showed signs of emotional problems. She would often make up illnesses that she did not actually have. She also behaved in ways that concerned people who knew her. She seemed to seek attention through stories about suffering. When Janine was almost 18 years old, she experienced several losses. 2 of her brothers died. One brother died when something he was building exploded in his hands. Then her father Richard became sick and died in January 1968. He was 56 years old. These deaths happened close together. Janine graduated from high school in June 1968. Soon after, she married a classmate named James Delaney. She also enrolled in beauty school. She got a certificate to work as a beautician and took a job at a hospital beauty parlor in San Antonio. James Delaney was drafted into the Navy. The couple had to move to Georgia. Janine left her job. While in Georgia, Janine gave birth to a son in January 1972. They named him Richard. The marriage began to fall apart that same year. In August 1972, Janine returned to Texas and asked a judge for a divorce. She said her husband had a bad temper and had been violent with her. But 2 months later, she and her husband reconciled. She took back what she had said, and the judge dismissed the case. In March 1974, Janine asked for a divorce again. This time she wanted it to be final. The divorce was granted in June 1974. Then began a long legal fight between Janine and James that lasted nearly 3 years. They argued about child support and visitation rights. Janine said James did not pay money to support their son. James said Janine did not let him see the boy as agreed. In August 1976, Janine won a court ruling against James. The legal battles continued until a judge told them to stop and settle their disagreements. They finally agreed and stopped taking each other to court. For months after the legal fights ended, Janine had a second child. She had a baby girl named Heather. At first, Janine said the father was a man who had died. But later she told someone that the girl was actually from a brief time when she got back together with James during their legal battles. In mid-1977, Janine moved into her mother's home. She decided to become a nurse. She joined a nursing program through the San Antonio School District. She did very well in her classes. When she took the licensing exam in October 1977, she scored more than 200 points above what was needed to pass. That same year, Janine took her first nursing job at Methodist Hospital in San Antonio. But she did not stay long. She had a conflict with a doctor, and the hospital asked her to resign. She then found work at the South Texas Medical Center. She worked in the unit where babies are born. After 3 months, she quit. She said she needed to have a small surgery and then rest. In October 1978, Janine saw a job advertisement. The Behar County Hospital in San Antonio was hiring vocational nurses. She applied and was hired. The hospital placed her in the pediatric intensive care unit. This is a special unit for very sick babies and young children. Her job was to care for these critically ill patients. She worked the night shift from 11 at night to 7 in the morning for her first 3 months. Then she switched to the afternoon shift from 3 in the afternoon to 11 at night. Janine Jones began working at the Behar County Hospital Pediatric Intensive Care Unit in October 1978. She worked under the supervision of a registered nurse named Sherilyn Pendergraft. During this time, a 6-day-old baby boy died from complications of a bowel disease. Pendergraft later said that Jones reacted very strangely to this death. Jones cried heavily and stared at the baby's body until workers came to take it away. As time passed, Jones became more confident in her role. She acted like she knew more than others. She often criticized doctors and questioned their decisions. She would call doctors many times during her shifts about small problems. Some doctors began to see her as a nuisance. She also talked openly about her personal life and future plans, which made some co-workers uncomfortable. On May 21, 1981, a 15-month-old boy named Christopher Hogita died from cardiac arrest. The baby had been in the hospital for 6 months with heart problems, pneumonia, and diarrhea. When he died, Jones cried and held his body. She kept saying that he was her boy. On September 16, 1981, a 2-year-old girl named Rosemary Vega came to the hospital for a common heart surgery. Her mother, Rosemary Cantu, worked in the hospital housekeeping department. She was holding her daughter when Jones entered the room. Jones injected the girl with something. When the mother asked what it was, Jones said it was medicine to help the girl rest. After Jones left, the girl suddenly stopped breathing normally. Doctors tried to save her, but could not. Rosemary Vega died within minutes. By late 1981, hospital leaders noticed that many babies were dying in the pediatric intensive care unit. They suspected Jones might be harming children. They looked into the situation, but found no clear proof. 10 babies had died while Jones was working, but hospital leaders thought this might just be bad luck. They did not fire her. On October 10, 1981, 6-month-old Jose Flores died from bleeding that would not stop. Doctors tried to save him for 52 minutes. No one examined his body after death to find out exactly what happened. A note from that day showed that Jones was present when the boy's condition got worse. On December 22, 1981, a 25-month-old girl named Dorelia Rios died. She had been recovering well from stomach surgery. Then suddenly her condition got much worse and she died. That day, Jones wrote a note in the nursing book wishing the girl a Merry Christmas. Later that same month, on December 27th, a 4-week-old baby named Rolando Santos was admitted to the unit with breathing problems. 3 days later, he had a sudden seizure and almost died. A doctor named Ken Copeland ordered blood tests. The tests showed the baby had been given heparin, a blood thinner that he should not have received. The doctor told hospital leaders to investigate, but they did nothing. On January 10, 1982, Rolando Santos had another severe episode. This time doctors knew about the heparin. They gave him medicine to reverse its effects, and he recovered. On January 12th, the doctor wanted the baby moved out of the intensive care unit. When he returned that afternoon and saw the baby was still there, he moved the baby himself. On January 17, 1982, 4-month-old Patrick Zavala died. He had just had successful heart surgery and was doing well. That evening, his heart began beating irregularly and then stopped. Doctors and nurses were angry about so many unexpected deaths. Surgeons were especially upset because their patients kept dying after successful operations. Hospital leaders held an urgent meeting. They decided to lock away all supplies of heparin. They also agreed that Jones was the main person they suspected, but they could not agree on whether to fire her. Instead, they put her under closer watch and stopped giving her the sickest patients to care for. In March 1982, The hospital decided to replace all vocational nurses like Jones with registered nurses. The hospital offered Jones a job in another unit. Jones said she loved working with children and refused the offer. She quit her job. Soon after leaving the hospital, Jones began working for a pediatrician named Kathleen Holland in Kerrville, Texas. Holland had a private medical office. She knew Jones from before and trusted her judgment. Holland asked other doctors about Jones. Most gave good or neutral opinions. But one doctor, James Robotham, strongly warned Holland not to hire Jones. He had worked with Jones at the hospital and had become suspicious of her actions. Holland hired Jones anyway in August 1982. On August 24, 1982, parents brought their 14-month-old daughter, Chelsea McClellan, to Dr. Holland's office. Chelsea had been born early and had breathing problems as a baby, but she had fully recovered. That day she seemed to have trouble breathing. During the visit, Jones took Chelsea to another room while the parents talked with the doctor. A few minutes later, Jones called the doctor to come quickly. Chelsea was on an examination table, having what looked like a seizure. Jones was giving her oxygen through a mask. The doctor ordered medicine for the seizure. An ambulance took Chelsea to the hospital, where she stayed for 9 days. Her parents thanked Jones and the doctor for saving her life. On September 17, 1982, Chelsea's mother brought her back to the office. The mother said the doctor had asked her to come for a checkup, though the doctor later denied this. Jones gave Chelsea 2 shots. The shots contained succinylcholine, a strong muscle relaxant. This medicine was not prescribed for Chelsea. Shortly after the shots, Chelsea had serious trouble breathing and began convulsing violently. An ambulance was called. Jones rode in the ambulance with Chelsea. On the way to the hospital, Jones gave Chelsea another shot of succinylcholine. Chelsea's condition became much worse. Her heart stopped. Workers tried to save her but could not. Chelsea died at a small medical center near the road. The doctor signed the death certificate, saying the cause was unknown. Jones returned to Kerrville and worked the rest of her shift that day. Chelsea's parents were heartbroken. They placed an advertisement in the local newspaper thanking Dr. Holland and Janine Jones for their care during Chelsea's final moments. After Chelsea's death, Jones continued working in Kerrville. On August 30, 1982, a 7-year-old boy named Jimmy Pearson was rushed to the hospital with uncontrollable seizures. Jimmy had severe intellectual disabilities and could not speak. That same day, a 4-month-old baby named Christopher Parker came to Dr. Holland's office and suddenly had a seizure. Both children were taken to the hospital. Jones injected Jimmy Pearson again at the hospital. Christopher Parker survived. Jimmy Pearson recovered briefly, but died from complications on October 21, 1982. On September 23, 1982, Jones injected a 5-month-old baby girl named Rolinda Ruff with succinylcholine. The girl had not been prescribed this medicine. She had a severe health crisis and became paralyzed. Doctors at the hospital recognized the signs of succinylcholine poisoning. They alerted hospital leaders. That afternoon, a doctor named Duane Packard met with a surgeon named Joe Venez. They decided to investigate Jones's background. Venez called a doctor in San Antonio and described the unusual incidents in Kerrville. The San Antonio doctor said similar things had happened at the Behar County Hospital Pediatric Intensive Care Unit the year before. He promised to find the nurse's name and call back. Less than 5 minutes later, he called Venez. Venez asked if the nurse's name was Janine Jones. The doctor said yes, and told Venez he had a baby killer on his hands. Dr. Holland began to question Jones about her actions. She noticed a bottle of succinylcholine had a punctured lid. She asked Jones about it and about ordering extra bottles of the drug. Jones avoided answering clearly. On September 24th, Jones came to work and said she had taken too much antidepressant medicine. An ambulance took her to the hospital where doctors pumped her stomach. On September 28th, Jones returned to work. Dr. Holland told her she was no longer needed. The next day, Jones and Holland took lie detector tests. Jones did not pass. Holland fired her. Jones moved away to a mobile home on a ranch in San Angelo, Texas. In November 1982, she was arrested briefly and then released while awaiting more charges. In April 1983, while waiting to face charges, Jones married a 19-year-old nursing aide named Garen Turk. He believed she was innocent at first. On May 24, 1983, police officers went to Janine Jones's home in San Angelo, Texas. They arrested her for a final time. She was formally charged with the murder of Chelsea McClellan. Officers took her to a county jail in Williamson County to await her first court appearance. On May 27, 1983, Jones appeared before a judge. She said she was not guilty of the charge. The judge set her bond at $225,000 and ordered her to remain in custody. Jones's lawyers asked for the trial to be moved away from Kerrville. They were concerned that people in Kerrville already knew too much about the case. Judge John Carter agreed and moved the trial to Georgetown, Texas. The trial began in February 1984. The jury heard evidence about what happened to Chelsea McClellan on September 17, 1982. They learned about the shots Jones gave Chelsea and how Chelsea died shortly after. On February 15, 1984, the jury found Jones guilty of murder. In May 1984, the judge sentenced Jones to 99 years in prison. Under Texas law at that time, she would receive credit for good behavior that could reduce her sentence. The judge later said in an interview that he knew Jones might be released early because of a state law meant to reduce prison overcrowding. But the jurors did not know about this law when they decided the case. Many of them were angry when they later learned Jones would not spend her whole life in prison. After the first conviction, prosecutors brought more charges against Jones. They accused her of trying to kill 6 children by giving them harmful medicines. One of these cases involved Rolando Santos, the baby who had received heparin at Behar County Hospital between December 1981 and January 1982. Investigators found that during Jones's shifts at the hospital, patients were 10 times more likely to die or have sudden medical crises. In June 1984, Jones was convicted of attempting to murder Rolando Santos. The judge sentenced her to 60 years in prison. This sentence would run at the same time as her 99-year sentence, not added on after it. Jones was sent to the Dr. Lane Murray Unit in Gatesville, Texas, a prison for women. She remained there for many years. In 1998, during a hearing to consider releasing her early, Jones admitted for the first time that she had injected babies with harmful medicines. She also admitted she was guilty of killing Chelsea McClellan. For years before this, she had always said she did nothing wrong. In 2011, Jones wrote a letter to the Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles. In this letter, she again admitted to killing babies. She wrote that what she did was terrible. She said the only explanation she could find was that she was not thinking clearly before 1994, when she found God. However, when an author named Peter Elkind visited her in prison in 1987, she had strongly denied any mental health problems. At that time, she also kept changing her religious symbols, sometimes wearing a cross and other times wearing a Star of David. In 2013, news reports began to surface that Jones might be released from prison soon. This was because of the old Texas law that allowed early release for good behavior and to reduce prison crowding. By 2017, it became clear that Jones was scheduled to be released in March 2018. When Behar County District Attorney Nico LaHood learned about the planned release, he took action. In 2015, he had already formed a special team of investigators to look into cold cases involving Jones. Their goal was to find enough evidence to file new charges and keep Jones in prison. In August 2014, the parole board had denied Jones' release and said they would not review her case again until 2018. But the district attorney's office kept working. In June 2017, the district attorney's office announced new charges against Jones. They indicted her for the murders of 5 babies who died at Behar County Hospital in 1981 and 1982. The victims were Joshua Sawyer, Rosemary Vega, Richard Nelson, Patrick Zavala, and Paul Edward Villarreal. All of these children had died suddenly while Jones was working in the pediatric intensive care unit. Chelsea McClellan's parents, Patty and Reed McClellan, spoke publicly about their daughter's case. They urged other families whose babies had died or had strange medical crises at the San Antonio hospital to come forward and help build cases against Jones. Patty McClellan gave an interview on CNN in August 2013. She said she believed Jones would harm again if released from prison. Patty McClellan died in June 2019, before Jones's case was finally resolved. In December 2017, Jones was moved from the prison in Gatesville to a jail facility in San Antonio. This was done so she could appear in court more easily for the new charges. She entered a plea of not guilty to all 5 murder charges. In June 2018, Judge Andrew Carruthers ordered that Jones undergo a psychological evaluation. The court needed to determine if she was mentally fit to stand trial. Jones's public defender, Cornelius Cox, argued that because so much time had passed, it was difficult for Jones to remember everything clearly. He did not say she was delusional, but he raised questions about her mental state. Jones was kept in protective custody at the Behar County Jail. This was because her case was well known and to keep her separated from younger inmates who were in jail for other crimes. In February 2019, mental health professionals completed their evaluation. They concluded that Jones was competent to stand trial. They said she understood reality, even though she claimed to have reduced mental capacity because of recent strokes she had suffered. However, Judge Carruthers allowed Jones's lawyers to have her evaluated again by different doctors. Later in 2019, Jones withdrew her insanity defense. She did not attend a competency hearing in September 2019. This allowed the case against her to move forward. The judge set a date for the trial to begin in January 2020. In early January 2020, prosecutors announced that they had reached a tentative agreement with Jones. She wanted to avoid a trial by jury. She also wanted her personal belongings, which had been taken from her prison cell as evidence, to be returned to her. The agreement was that Jones would plead guilty to one of the 5 murder charges. In exchange, the other 4 charges would be dismissed. On January 16, 2020, Jones appeared in court before Judge Frank J. Castro. She was elderly and in poor health. She arrived in a wheelchair and used a walker to stand before the judge. She wore a light blue prison jumpsuit, broken glasses, and a surgical mask. She did not speak during the proceedings. She only interacted quietly with her lawyer. Jones pleaded guilty to the murder of Joshua Sawyer, an 11-month-old baby boy who died on December 12, 1981, at Behar County Hospital. The 4 other murder charges were dismissed as part of the plea agreement. Before the judge announced the sentence, family members of the victims were allowed to speak. The mother of Rosemary Vega and the sister of Paul Villarreal both spoke. They called Jones evil and cold-blooded. Connie Weeks, the mother of Joshua Sawyer, read a statement in court. She said she hoped Jones would live a long and miserable life behind bars. Judge Castro then sentenced Jones to life in prison. Under this sentence, she would have no possibility of parole for 20 years. She was given credit for the time she had already served while awaiting trial on these charges. This meant she would first be eligible for parole when she was 87 years old. Judge Castro spoke directly to Jones before concluding the hearing. He said that what she did was terrible. He said she took God's most precious gifts, which were defenseless and innocent babies. He told her that admitting guilt did not come close to making up for what she did to the families and the tragedies she caused. He said he believed her ultimate judgment would come in the next life. After the sentencing, Andy Kahan, who works with crime victims in Houston, spoke to reporters. He praised the district attorney's work in keeping Jones in prison. He called Jones a psychopathic, egotistical, narcissistic nurse who tried to play God. As of 2026, Janine Jones remains in prison at the Dr. Lane Murray Unit in Gatesville, Texas. She continues to serve her sentence for the murders of Chelsea McClellan and Joshua Sawyer, and for the attempted murder of Rolando Santos. The families of her victims live with the knowledge that she will likely spend the rest of her life behind bars. Story 2. Amelia Elizabeth Hobley was born in 1837 in a small village called Pile Marsh, near the city of Bristol in England. She was the youngest of 5 children. Her father, Samuel Hobley, was a master shoemaker. Her mother was named Sarah. The family was not rich, but they were a normal working family. When Amelia was still a child, her mother became very ill with a disease called typhus. This illness affected her mother's mind. Sarah Hobley would have violent and frightening fits. Because her father was working, young Amelia was often the one who had to care for her mother during these episodes. This was a very difficult and upsetting experience for a young girl. It taught her what it looked like when a person seemed to lose their mind. Her mother died in 1848, when Amelia was about 11 years old. After her mother died, Amelia went to live with an aunt in the city of Bristol for a time. Later, she became an apprentice to a corset maker. This means she worked for someone to learn how to make corsets, which were a common piece of clothing for women at that time. Her father died in 1859. Her oldest brother, Thomas, took over the family shoe business. By 1861, when she was 24 years old, Amelia had a serious disagreement with one of her other brothers, James. After this, she moved out and found a place to live on her own in Trinity Street, Bristol. It was there that she met a man named George Thomas. He was much older than her. When they decided to get married, they both lied about their ages on the official marriage certificate. George said he was 59, but he was really 70. Amelia said she was 30, but she was really 24. They did this to make their age difference seem smaller. After she married, Amelia Elizabeth Thomas began training to become a nurse. While working as a nurse, she met a midwife named Ellen Dane. A midwife is a woman who helps other women give birth. From Ellen Dane, Amelia learned about another way to make money. This was called baby farming. At that time, many young women who were not married and became pregnant had no way to support themselves or their baby. They would pay a woman, a baby farmer, to take their baby and care for it. Sometimes they paid a small amount each week. Other times, they paid a larger, one-time fee to have the baby adopted into a new home. Ellen Dane told Amelia that this could be an easy way to earn a living. A woman could take in these unwanted babies and keep the money. But Ellen Dane herself was in trouble with the authorities for her own actions. Shortly after meeting Amelia, she fled to the United States to escape being arrested. Amelia now knew about the business. Soon after this, Amelia gave birth to her own daughter. This meant she had to stop working as a nurse to care for her child. In 1869, Amelia's husband, George Thomas, died. Amelia was now a widow with a young daughter and no husband to help bring in money. She needed to find a way to support herself and her child. She remembered what the midwife, Ellen Dane, had told her about baby farming. This seemed like a possible solution. She decided to try it. This was the beginning of her new way to earn money. Amelia Thomas began her work as a baby farmer in Bristol. At first, she did not mean to harm the children. She took in babies and young children and cared for them in her home. The mothers paid her a fee. But soon, Amelia had more children than she could properly care for. The living conditions in her home were poor. The children did not get enough food or clean water. Many of them became sick and died. Whether she meant for this to happen or not, a very large number of children died while in her care. In 1872, Amelia married again. Her new husband was a man named William Dyer. He worked as a laborer for a brewer. Amelia Elizabeth Thomas became Amelia Elizabeth Dyer. She and William had 2 children together. But the marriage was not happy, and she later left him. Even with a new husband and more children of her own, Amelia continued her baby farming business. She needed the money. After some time, Amelia changed the way she did things. Caring for the children until they died from sickness or hunger took time and cost money for food. She realized she could make more money if the children died soon after she received them. This way, she could keep almost all of the payment from the mother and not have to spend anything on the child. So she began to murder them. Her method was always the same. She would take a piece of white tape. This was a strong ribbon that women used in sewing and dressmaking. She would wrap this tape tightly around the child's neck 2 times and tie a knot. She would strangle the child until it was dead. She later said that it was quick. In 1879, a doctor became suspicious. He had been called to certify the deaths of several babies in Amelia Dyer's care. This was too many deaths for one home. The police were called, but Amelia was not charged with murder. She was only charged with neglect. She was found guilty and sentenced to 6 months of hard labor in prison. This experience was very hard on her mind. After she was released from prison, Amelia tried to return to nursing, but her mind seemed unstable. She was acting strangely. At times when she was under suspicion or when things became difficult, she would act as if she had lost her mind. She was sent to mental hospitals several times. Because she had been a nurse in an asylum, she knew how to act to convince the doctors she was insane. This was a way for her to hide from the police and have a safe place to stay. During one of these times, she drank 2 whole bottles of a drug called laudanum to try to kill herself. But because she had used this drug for so long, her body was used to it, and she survived. When she got out of the hospital, she went back to baby farming and murder. She learned from her mistake in 1879. She stopped calling doctors to certify deaths. Instead, she began to hide the bodies herself. She moved her family to different towns and cities many times. This helped her escape suspicion and find new customers. She used many false names like Mrs. Thomas, Mrs. Harding, and others. She moved from Bristol to places like Cardiff, and then to villages in Berkshire. In 1895, Amelia Dyer moved to a house at 45 Kensington Road in Reading, a large town in Berkshire. She lived there with her daughter, Mary Ann, and her son-in-law, Arthur Palmer. She also brought along an older woman she had met, named Jane Smith. Amelia told the women who came to her that Jane Smith was her mother. This was a lie, but it made Amelia seem like a kind, caring daughter from a good family, which helped mothers trust her. Amelia placed advertisements in newspapers. The ads said that a loving couple with no children wanted to adopt a healthy baby and give it a good home. She asked for a one-time payment of £10. This was a very large amount of money at that time. In January 1896, a young woman named Evelina Marmon gave birth to a baby girl in Cheltenham. The baby's name was Doris. Evelina was a barmaid and was not married. She could not keep her baby and work, so she placed an ad in the newspaper looking for someone to take her child. She saw Amelia's ad right next to hers. She wrote to Mrs. Harding at an address in Reading. Amelia wrote back. Her letters were warm and loving. She promised to give the baby a wonderful life. Evelina wanted to pay a small amount each week, but Amelia insisted on the full £10 paid at once. Evelina was desperate, so she agreed. Amelia did not take baby Doris back to the house in Reading. Instead, she went to London, to the home of another daughter, Polly. On March 30th, 1896, in that house in London, Amelia Dyer took a piece of white tape. She wrapped it around baby Doris's neck and strangled her to death. Her daughter Polly was in the room and helped her mother wrap the baby's body in cloth. They kept some of the baby's clothes to sell to a pawn shop. On April 1st, another child, a 13-month-old boy named Harry Simmons, was brought to the same house in London. Amelia did not have any more white tape, so she took the same piece of tape from around Doris's neck and used it to strangle the little boy. On April 2nd, Amelia put the two small bodies into a carpet bag. She added some heavy bricks to make it sink. She took the bag on a train back to Reading. She went to a quiet spot by the River Thames, near a place called Caversham Lock. She pushed the carpet bag through the railings and into the river. She thought the bodies would never be found. On March 30th, 1896, 2 days before Amelia Dyer dumped the carpet bag into the river, a bargeman was working on the River Thames at Reading. He saw a package floating in the water and pulled it out. Inside the package was the body of a baby girl. The police were called. A detective named Constable Anderson from Reading Borough Police began to investigate. He looked closely at the paper wrapped around the body. He found a label from the train station in Bristol. He also found a name faintly written on the paper. The name was Mrs. Thomas, and there was an address. The police did not know it yet, but this baby was a different victim. She was later identified as a child named Helena Fry. But the name and address gave the police their first real clue. On April 2nd, Amelia dumped the carpet bag with Doris and Harry into the river. She did not know that the body of Helena Fry had already been found nearby. On April 3rd, Detective Anderson went to the address he had found on the paper. It was a house in Reading. He and another officer began to watch the house. They saw a woman matching Amelia's description. They learned that this woman was planning to move away very soon. The police knew they had to act fast. They decided to use a trick. They sent a young woman to the house. She was a police decoy. Her job was to act like a mother who wanted to give away her baby. This would prove that the woman in the house was still running her baby farm. When the decoy arrived at the house on April 3rd, she knocked on the door. But before Amelia could answer, the detectives came out of hiding and went to the door themselves. When the police entered the house, they were hit by a terrible smell. It was the smell of death. They did not find any bodies inside, but they found many other things. They found white tape of the kind used in dressmaking. They found telegrams and letters from mothers who had given their children to a Mrs. Thomas. They found pawn tickets for baby clothes. This meant someone had sold the clothes the babies were wearing. They also found receipts for advertisements placed in newspapers. It was clear that many children had passed through this house. The police calculated that in just the last few months, at least 20 children had been given to the woman they now knew was Amelia Dyer. They arrested her on April 4th, 1896. She was charged with murder. Her son-in-law, Arthur Palmer, was also arrested on suspicion of helping her. After her arrest, the police dragged the bottom of the River Thames near Caversham Lock. They found more bodies. In total, they found 6 more dead children in the river. One was the body of Doris Marmon. Another was the body of Harry Simmons. Each of these babies had been strangled with the same kind of white tape. The police now knew they had found a woman who had killed many children. 11 days after she had given her daughter to Amelia, Evelina Marmon read about the discovery in the newspapers. She went to the police. She was taken to see the body of the baby girl found in the river. She identified it as her daughter, Doris. She was heartbroken. While in prison in Reading, Amelia Dyer wrote a confession. Her spelling and grammar were poor, but her meaning was clear. She wrote to the magistrates, the officials in charge of her case. She said that her daughter Mary and her son-in-law Arthur had nothing to do with the crimes. She said she alone must answer for the awful crimes she had committed. Because of this letter, Arthur Palmer was released from prison. On May 22, 1896, Amelia Dyer stood trial at the famous Old Bailey Court in London. She was charged with the murder of Doris Marman. Her daughter Polly gave evidence in court. She told the court what her mother had done in the house in London. A man also testified that he had seen Amelia near the river at Caversham Lock on the day she dumped the bag. Amelia's lawyers tried to say she was insane. They pointed out that she had been in mental hospitals many times. But the prosecutors argued that her madness was a trick. They said she only acted insane when she was afraid of being caught. The jury believed the prosecutors. It took them only 4.5 minutes to find her guilty of murder. The judge sentenced her to death by hanging. For 3 weeks, she waited in the condemned cell at Newgate Prison. She filled 5 books with her writings, which she called her last true and only confession. The night before her execution, a chaplain visited her. He asked if she had anything to confess. She held up her books and said, "Isn't this enough?" On the morning of June 10, 1896, Amelia Dyer was led to the scaffold. The hangman, James Billington, placed the noose around her neck. She was asked if she had any last words. She said, "I have nothing to say." At exactly 9 o'clock in the morning, she was hanged. She was 59 years old. After her death, investigators looked through all the evidence they had found in her many homes over the years. They found letters from mothers and many small items of baby clothing. They believed that Amelia Dyer had been killing children for a very long time, possibly as far back as the 1860s. Some estimated that she may have murdered over 400 children in her lifetime, making her one of the most deadly killers in history. The case shocked all of England. Because of what Amelia Dyer did, the government made new laws. These laws gave local authorities more power to inspect baby farms and make sure children were safe. The case also helped the NSBCC, a new charity that worked to protect children from cruelty, to become better known and more powerful. For the victims, there was no justice. Babies like Doris Marman, Harry Simmons, and Helena Fry could not be brought back. Their mothers, like Evelina Marman, had to live with the grief and guilt of having handed their children to a murderer. The story of Amelia Dyer became a warning about greed and evil, and it led to changes that helped protect other children in the future. The case of Amelia Dyer was closed. Story 3. Clarence Ray Allen was born on January 16, 1930, in Blair, Oklahoma. His mother was part Choctaw, and his father was part Cherokee. He grew up in a poor family. As a child, he worked in the cotton fields with his family. He stopped going to school after the 8th grade. When he was young, Allen moved to California's San Joaquin Valley. He held several jobs there. He worked as a warehouse manager. He worked as a ranch hand. He also worked as a night watchman. In 1968, he started his own security guard business. The business did well. He made enough money to buy his own ranch. He kept show horses on the property. He owned an airplane. He built a swimming pool at his home. Allen was married and had 2 sons. He and his first wife divorced, and he raised the boys himself. People who knew him said he could be generous. He loaned money to people who needed it. He gave nice gifts to his employees. He wrote poetry and gave it to friends as presents. For a time, he served as a deacon at a church. But there was another side to Allen that most people did not see. In his 40s, he began organizing robberies in the Central Valley. He used his security business to help plan these crimes. He would study places during the day to rob them later. He gathered young men who were easy to influence and made them part of his crew. These men worked for him in his security business and also helped him commit crimes. Allen had strict rules for the people who worked with him. He told them that anyone who informed on him would be killed. He carried a newspaper clipping in his wallet about a man and woman who had been murdered in Nevada. He showed this to his crew and told them this was what happened to people who talked. He said that even if he was in prison, he had ways to reach people who snitched on him. One couple Alan had known for many years was Ray and Frances Schlietwitz. They owned a store called Fran's Market near Fresno. In the past, when Alan did not have much money, he had rented a small house on their property for $75 a month. Sometimes he could not pay the rent, and Ray Schlietwitz let him work it off by farming their land. By 1974, Alan had his own ranch in the same area, but he still knew the Schlietwitz family well. In June 1974, Alan decided to rob Fran's Market, the store owned by Ray and Frances Schlietwitz. He knew the store and the family well. He put together a plan with his son Roger, along with two men who worked for him, named Carl Mayfield and Charles Jones. The plan worked in steps. First, Roger Allen invited the Schlietwitz son Brian to a swimming party at Allen's house. Brian was 19 years old at the time. While Brian was swimming, someone took his pants. They removed the keys to Fran's Market from his pocket. Then they put the pants back. That same night, Brian went on a date. Alan had arranged for Brian to go out with Mary Sue Kitts. Mary Sue was 17 years old and was Roger Allen's girlfriend. While Brian and Mary Sue were on their date, Allen, Mayfield, and Jones used the stolen keys to break into Fran's Market. They took a safe from the store. They opened it later and divided what was inside. There was $500 in cash and more than $10,000 in money orders. Over the next few weeks, Alan needed to cash the stolen money orders. He got help from several people. His son Roger helped. Mary Sue Kitts helped. Alan's girlfriend Shirley Dokel helped. Two other people, Barbara Carrasco and her stepson Eugene Furrow, also helped. They went to shopping centers in Southern California and used fake identification to cash the money orders. After some time passed, Mary Sue Kitts began to feel guilty about what she had done. She contacted Brian Schlietwitz and told him the truth. She was crying as she explained that Alan had burglarized his parents' store and that she had helped cash the stolen money orders. She said Alan had given her a wig and fake ID to use. Brian went to Roger Allen's house and confronted him. Roger admitted that his family had committed the burglary. Brian told Roger that Mary Sue Kitts had confessed everything to him. Roger then told his father what Brian had said. Alan responded that both Brian and Mary Sue would have to be dealt with. Alan went to see Ray and Frances Schlietwitz. He told them he had not burglarized their store. He said he loved Brian like his own son. But then he also threatened them. He hinted that someone might burn down their house. Later, Roger paid Eugene Furrow $50 to drive by the Schlietwitz home at midnight and fire gunshots at it. Alan then called a meeting at his house. Charles Jones, Carl Mayfield, and Eugene Furrow were there. Alan told them that Mary Sue Kitts had been talking too much and should be killed. He asked for a vote on whether she should die. Everyone voted yes. They voted yes because they were afraid of what Alan would do if they did not agree. Alan had often told them he would kill anyone who snitched on him. He said he had friends who could reach people even if he was in prison. He had shown them the newspaper clipping about the murdered couple in Nevada and claimed he had killed them with a shotgun. He said the secret witness program was useless because a good lawyer could always find out who informed. Alan made a plan to poison Mary Sue Kitts. He sent Mayfield and Furrow to get cyanide capsules from a winery that was one of his security clients. He put some heavy stepping stones from his yard into Charles Jones' truck. These stones would be used to weigh down Mary Sue's body after she was killed, so it would sink in the canal. The plan was to have a party at Shirley Dokel's apartment. Mary Sue would be invited, and they would trick her into taking the cyanide pills. Charles Jones suggested they just send Mary Sue away somewhere until things calmed down. Alan overruled him. Shirley Dokel did not want a murder in her apartment. Alan ignored her objection. Shortly before the party started, Alan told Eugene Furrow that if he did not kill Mary Sue, it would be just as easy to kill 2 people instead of 1. Alan then left the apartment. He arranged for Mayfield and Jones to call him from a nearby phone booth to report what happened. Mary Sue Kitts arrived at the party. When she was offered the pills, she said she would not take them without wine. Mayfield and Jones called Alan and told him. Alan told Furrow to kill her one way or another. He just wanted her dead. Later, the group brought wine, beer, and other drugs to the apartment, but Mary Sue still did not take the cyanide. Alan met Furrow outside the apartment. He told him again that he did not care how it was done, just do it. He said he had people surrounding the apartment, and that Furrow would be killed if he tried to leave. Furrow went back inside. Eventually, Furrow and Mary Sue were alone in the apartment. Furrow began to strangle her. At that moment, the phone rang. It was Alan. He asked Furrow if he had killed her yet. Furrow said no. Alan ordered him to do it and hung up. Furrow then strangled Mary Sue Kitts until she was dead. Furrow called Alan and told him to come pick up the body. Charles Jones was with Alan when he got the call. Jones said he wanted nothing to do with murder. Alan told him it was already done and that he was equally involved now. Alan, Dokel, and Jones went to get the body. They wrapped it and put it in the trunk of Alan's Cadillac. Alan led Jones and Furrow to his house. They transferred the body to Jones' car. Then Alan led them in his Cadillac to the mountains. They stopped after crossing a canal. Furrow and Jones tied the heavy stones to the body with wire, just as Alan had instructed. Alan watched for traffic while they threw the body into the canal. Mary Sue Kitts was never found. In the days and months after the murder, Alan threatened and bragged to his crew. When Carl Mayfield asked how things went, Alan said everything went okay. When Mayfield later asked how Furrow was doing, Alan said Furrow was no longer in existence. He explained it was easy to go to Mexico and have someone killed for only $50. In truth, Furrow was still alive. About 6 months later, Mayfield asked Alan if he worried about others talking. Alan said he was not afraid. He said if anyone snitched, he would have them killed. He said he could reach informers, even if he was locked up. He told Charles Jones that talking was a disease, and the only way to stop it was to kill the person talking. Alan continued committing robberies. In August 1974, he had Furrow and Jones help rob an elderly couple at their jewelry store. In early 1977, he brought new men into his crew named Alan Robinson and Benjamin Meyer. He told Meyer about a woman who got mouthy and had to be wasted. He said she sleeps with the fishes. He warned Meyer that if anyone snitched on him or his family, he would waste them. He said there was no rock or bush they could hide behind. Alan planned more robberies. In February 1977, his crew robbed a Kmart in Tulare and took over $16,000. In March 1977, they robbed a Kmart in Visalia. During that robbery, a man named Larry Green shot a bystander. Police arrested Green, Meyer, and Allen. Allen was tried and convicted in 1977 for robbery, attempted robbery, and assault with a deadly weapon from the Visalia Kmart crime. His arrest also led to a second trial in 1977 for the Franz Market burglary and the murder of Mary Sue Kitts. At that trial, many witnesses testified against him. Brian Schlietwitz testified. Carl Mayfield, Charles Jones, and Eugene Furrow testified. Shirley Dokel, Barbara Carrasco, and Benjamin Meyer also testified. Allen was convicted of burglary, conspiracy, and first-degree murder for killing Mary Sue Kitts. He was sentenced to life in prison. On the night of September 5, 1980, after the shootings at Franz Market, a neighbor named Jack Abbott heard the gunshots from his home next door. He grabbed his own gun and went outside to see what was happening. When he arrived at the market, he saw Hamilton and Barbeau fleeing. Abbott and Hamilton exchanged gunfire. Abbott was hit, but managed to shoot Hamilton in the foot. Hamilton ran to his getaway car and drove away. Barbo ran back inside the market and hid in the restroom. Police arrived at the scene within minutes. They found Barbo hiding and arrested her. Inside the market, they found 3 people dead: Brian Schlietwitz, Douglas White, and Josephine Rocha. They also found Joe Rios alive but badly wounded. He had been shot in the face but survived because he raised his arm to block the blast. He was taken to the hospital. Later that evening, Hamilton called Kenneth Allen. He said he had lost his kitten and that things went wrong at the store. They arranged to meet and exchange cars. Hamilton then drove to the home of Gary Brady in Modesto. Brady was another former Folsom inmate who had been paroled 1 month before Hamilton. While staying there, Hamilton told Brady he had robbed a place and killed 3 people for the old man, meaning Clarence Allen. He had Brady's wife write a letter to Allen asking for the money he was owed. The letter was signed Country and gave Brady's Modesto address as the return address. 5 days later, on September 10, 1980, Hamilton tried to rob a liquor store in Modesto. The liquor store was located across the street from Brady's apartment. Police arrested him for that robbery. When they searched him, they found an address book in his pocket. Inside the address book was a list of names and addresses. The list contained the names of 8 people who had testified against Clarence Allen at his 1977 murder trial for Mary Sue Kitts. The names were Eugene Furrow, Barbara Carrasco, Benjamin Meyer, Charles Jones, Carl Mayfield, Shirley Dokel, and Ray and Brian Schlietwitz. Brian Schlietwitz was already dead. At about the same time, investigators went to Kenneth Allen's home. Kenneth's wife Kathy gave them a mugshot of Billy Ray Hamilton. This was the same photo that Clarence Allen had given Kenneth during the prison visit, and that Kenneth had smuggled out in his baby's diaper. Shortly after the Franz Market murders, Kenneth Allen was arrested on drug charges. Police interviewed him about his knowledge of the murders. At first, he did not tell them everything. But a week later, after thinking about his situation and learning that Hamilton had been arrested, Kenneth contacted the police. He wanted to make a deal. He said he would provide information in exchange for protective custody and his choice of prisons. Kenneth gave several statements to police over the following weeks. In his first statement, he admitted that his father had told him Hamilton was coming to town to commit robbery and murder, but he said he did not provide the guns. In a later statement, after talking to his lawyer, Kenneth told the full truth. He said his father had planned to kill everyone who testified against him, so that if he won his appeal, there would be no witnesses for a new trial. Kenneth admitted he had provided Hamilton with transportation, money, a shotgun, and a revolver. In February 1981, Kenneth entered into a formal plea agreement with prosecutors. He agreed to testify truthfully against Hamilton, Barbo, and his father. In exchange, he would be allowed to plead guilty to lesser charges of being an accessory to murder and possessing drugs. He expected to serve about 2 years in prison. However, in July 1981, Kenneth wrote a letter to his father in prison. Prison officials intercepted the letter. In it, Kenneth said he planned to change his testimony and tell a different story to clear his father. When prosecutors confronted him with this letter, Kenneth admitted writing it. He said his testimony at his father's preliminary hearing had been untrue. He claimed Hamilton had only come to town to fence stolen guns, not to kill anyone. The prosecutors told Kenneth his plea agreement was terminated. A week later, while being taken to court, Kenneth told investigators that his original story was actually the truth. He said he had written the letter to his father because his wife Kathy pressured him. Kathy had a very close relationship with Clarence Allen. Kenneth said that in exchange for writing the letter, his wife started giving him sexual favors during prison visits and helped him get drugs while he was in jail. He said the story he told at the preliminary hearings was the real truth. Despite this, the prosecutors maintained that the plea agreement was over. Before Clarence Allen's trial began, a hearing was held to decide whether Kenneth could testify. Kenneth told the court that he knew there was no plea agreement anymore. He knew he would get nothing for his testimony, but he said he wanted to testify truthfully anyway. The court allowed him to testify. Clarence Allen's trial for the Franz Market murders took place in 1982. The trial was moved to Glenn County because of all the publicity in Fresno. The trial lasted 23 days. 58 witnesses testified. The prosecution presented a massive amount of evidence. Kenneth Allen testified against his father. He described the prison visit, the plan to kill witnesses, and how he provided guns and transportation to Hamilton. Gary Brady testified about Hamilton staying with him and admitting to the murders. Another inmate, Joseph Rainier, testified that he saw Allen and Hamilton talking every day in the Folsom prison yard. Rainier said Allen told him Hamilton was going to take care of some rats, and that Kenny would handle transportation. Even Kathy Allen, who tried to help Clarence, testified that she heard him mention guns for witnesses during the prison visit. The hit list found on Hamilton was presented as evidence. The mugshot of Hamilton found at Kenneth's home was also presented. The letters Allen wrote to Kenneth and Kathy about country music were read to the jury. Kenneth explained that country music and show were code words for murder. Clarence Allen took the witness stand in his own defense. He denied any involvement in the Franz Market murders or the conspiracy. But on cross-examination, he admitted many damaging facts. He admitted writing the letters and that they referred to Hamilton coming to Fresno. He admitted that taken care of meant to kill. He admitted talking to Hamilton in the prison yard. He admitted ordering Kathy Allen to call the Schlietwitzes and pretend to be Mary Sue Kitts to try to stop the investigation. He admitted helping dispose of Mary Sue Kitts' body. He also explained his view on snitches, saying that when someone becomes an informant, killing them would do them a favor. After 3 days of deliberation, the jury found Clarence Allen guilty of 3 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of conspiracy to commit murder. The jury also found true several special circumstances that made him eligible for the death penalty. These included that he had previously been convicted of murder, that he had committed multiple murders, and that he had killed witnesses to prevent them from testifying. The penalty phase of the trial lasted 7 days. The prosecution presented evidence of Allen's long history of violent crimes. They showed that he had masterminded 8 armed robberies between 1974 and 1977. These included robberies of jewelry stores, bars, a drugstore, and multiple Kmart stores. In some of these robberies, people had been shot and permanently injured. They also presented evidence that while in the Fresno County Jail in 1981, Allen had organized an attack on another inmate, a suspected child molester. Inmates scalded the man with hot water, beat him, shot him with a homemade gun, and threw razor blades and excrement at him. Allen's defense presented only 2 witnesses at the penalty phase. His former girlfriend Diane Harris testified that he was good to children, wrote poetry, and had helped her financially. But she admitted he had threatened to kill her husband. Another inmate, John Plemons, testified that he, not Allen, had organized the jailhouse attack. A correctional officer rebutted this by testifying that the victim had said Allen was the one who instigated it. After 1 day of deliberation, the jury returned a verdict of death. On November 22, 1982, the judge sentenced Clarence Allen to death. Billy Ray Hamilton was tried separately for the Franz Market murders. He was convicted in 1981 and also sentenced to death. He remains on death row. Connie Barbeau was arrested at the scene and received a life sentence for her role in the murders. Kenneth Allen was eventually charged for his part in the crimes. He pleaded guilty to murder with special circumstances and received a sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. After his conviction, Clarence Allen spent more than 23 years appealing his death sentence. His case was reviewed by the California Supreme Court, which affirmed his conviction and sentence in 1986. He filed multiple habeas corpus petitions in federal court. In 2004 and 2005, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals rejected his appeals. The courts found that while his trial lawyer had made mistakes at the penalty phase, the evidence against Allen was so overwhelming that there was no reasonable chance the outcome would have been different. The United States Supreme Court declined to hear his case in October 2005. In November 2005, a judge set Allen's execution date for January 17, 2006. Allen was 75 years old at the time. He was in very poor health. He was legally blind. He had diabetes. He used a wheelchair. He had suffered a major heart attack in September 2005. His lawyers argued that executing someone so old and sick would be cruel and unusual punishment. They asked Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger for clemency. On January 13, 2006, Governor Schwarzenegger denied clemency. He stated that Allen's crimes were not the result of youth or inexperience, but came from the calculated decisions of a mature man. On January 16th, Allen turned 76 years old. That same day, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals rejected his final appeal. Later that day, the U.S. Supreme also rejected his request for a stay of execution. Only Justice Stephen Breyer dissented, noting Allen's age, poor health, and the 23 years he had spent on death row. That evening at San Quentin State Prison, Allen ate his last meal. He requested buffalo steak, Kentucky Fried Chicken with only white meat, sugar-free pecan pie, sugar-free black walnut ice cream, and whole milk. At 6 p.m., he was moved to a cell next to the death chamber. He met with his Native American spiritual advisors. He was allowed to wear a beaded headband and a necklace into the execution chamber. He carried a feather with him. Shortly after midnight on January 17, 2006, guards helped Allen walk from his wheelchair into the death chamber. He was strapped onto the gurney. He looked toward the room where his family and friends were watching and mouthed the words, "I love you." The execution began at 12:19 a.m. The first drug made him unconscious. The second drug paralyzed him. The third drug was meant to stop his heart. When the first dose of the third drug did not work completely, a second dose was administered. At 12:38 a.m., Clarence Ray Allen was pronounced dead. Before his death, Allen gave a final statement. He thanked his friends, family, and supporters. He spoke to the other inmates on death row, telling them they would be joining him one day. He ended with the words, "Hoka hey, it's a good day to die. Thank you very much. I love you all. Goodbye." Allen was 76 years old, the oldest person ever executed in California, and the second oldest in the United States since the death penalty was restored in 1976. His execution was the 13th in California since 1978. Billy Ray Hamilton remains on death row at San Quentin. Kenneth Allen and Connie Barbeau continue to serve their life sentences in prison. The bodies of Mary Sue Kitts and the 3 victims at Franz Market were never returned to their families, but after 26 years, the case against Clarence Ray Allen reached its final conclusion. Story 4. A woman named Enriqueta Martí Rapalz was born in a small town called Sant Feliu de Llobregat in the year 1868. This town was near the large city of Barcelona in Spain. Her family was not rich, and they lived a simple life. When Enriqueta became a young woman, she decided to leave her hometown. She moved to the big city of Barcelona to find work. In Barcelona, she found jobs as a maidservant. This meant she cleaned houses and did other tasks for other people. She also worked as a nanny, which meant she took care of children for a family. After some time, Enriqueta stopped working as a servant and nanny. She began to work as a prostitute. This means she sold sex for money. She worked in a brothel, which is a house where people pay to have sex. This brothel was for wealthy clients, people with a lot of money. In 1895, when Enriqueta was 27 years old, she got married. The man she married was a painter named Juan Pugilo. Their marriage was not happy. They had many problems. One said that Enriqueta had relationships with other men. He also said her behavior was unpredictable, and she often visited other houses of prostitution. Because of these things, they separated. They got back together and separated again many times, about 6 times in total. They never had any children together. By the time Enriqueta was later arrested in 1912, she and her husband had been separated for 5 years. In 1909, Enriqueta opened her own brothel. Because she had worked in a high-class brothel before, she knew many rich people in Barcelona. Her new brothel attracted some of these wealthy men. Some of these men had sexual desires that were not normal. They wanted to have sex with children. Enriqueta was willing to get them what they wanted for a lot of money. To find children for these clients, Enriqueta developed a plan. During the day, she would dress in old, poor clothing. She went to the poorest parts of the city, where families had very little money. She would look for children who were playing alone, or who looked like they were not being watched. She also went to places where poor people lined up to get free food from monasteries. She looked for the children who seemed most alone and abandoned. At night, Enriqueta would change her clothes again. She would dress in fine clothes and go to places where rich people in Barcelona liked to go, like the Opera House and fancy casinos. It is believed that while she was there, she would talk to her wealthy clients and offer to find children for them. At the same time, Enriqueta was also working as a kind of healer or witch doctor. Many people at that time were very afraid of a disease called tuberculosis, which killed many people. Enriqueta claimed she could cure tuberculosis and other sicknesses. She also said she could make creams and drinks that would stop a person from getting old. She told people she made these medicines from the bodies of children. She said she used children's fat, blood, hair, and bones. Rich people paid her a lot of money for these remedies. During a time of riots and fighting in Barcelona called the Tragic Week in 1909, Enriqueta was arrested. The police found a young man from a rich family in her flat. They accused her of running a brothel that used children for sex. However, because she had powerful friends among her wealthy clients, she was never put on trial. She was set free. After her release in 1909, Enriqueta continued her 2 secret activities. She continued to kidnap children for her wealthy clients. She also continued to kill children to make her remedies for rich customers. She did not stop for the next 3 years. Her method for taking children was always the same. She would go to poor areas of Barcelona. She looked for small children who were playing alone or who seemed lost. She would approach them in a friendly way. She often promised them candy or sweets to get them to come with her. Once a child was close enough, she would cover them with a black cloth so they could not see. Then she would force them to walk with her to one of her flats. Between 1909 and 1912, many children disappeared from the poor parts of Barcelona. But the police did not investigate these disappearances very much. The families of these children had no money and no power. The police did not think their cases were important. So Enriqueta was able to continue for a long time without anyone stopping her. Enriqueta kept the kidnapped children in her flats. She did not treat them well. She fed them simple, poor food like potatoes and old bread. She did not beat them often. Instead, she preferred to pinch them hard when they did something wrong. She cut their hair short. She told them that their real parents were dead and that she was now their mother. She made them call her mama. The children were never allowed to go near the windows or balconies. They were also forbidden from entering certain rooms in the flat. She kept them trapped inside. The children suffered in different ways. Some of the children, especially the girls, were taken to her brothel. There, wealthy men paid Enriqueta money, so they could have sex with these young children. This was a secret service she offered to her rich clients. Other children were used for a different purpose. Enriqueta needed bodies to make her special creams and potions. She killed some of the children in her flat. One witness, a young girl named Angelita, later told people what she had secretly seen. She said she watched Enriqueta kill a 5-year-old boy named Pepito on the kitchen table. After a child was killed, Enriqueta would use their body parts. She took their blood and kept it in jars. She removed their fat and kept it in pots. She cut their hair and saved it. She even kept some of their bones. She used these things to mix into the ointments and elixirs that she sold to rich people who were sick or who wanted to stay young. The flat where she kept the children had two very different sides. The room where the children stayed was simple and smelled bad. But there was another room in the flat that was always locked. Inside this locked room, the walls were lined with shelves. On these shelves there were many pitchers, jars, and bowls. These containers held the remains of the children she had killed. There were jars with thick, greasy human fat. There were bowls with blood that had become solid. There were bundles of children's hair. There were small bones from children's hands. There were even bones that had been ground into powder. In this same room, she also kept the pots of creams and bottles of potions that were already mixed and ready to sell. Over time, Enriqueta used several different flats and houses in Barcelona to hide her activities. She did not stay in one place for too long. In each of these places, she left evidence. In some flats, she built false walls. Behind these walls, she hid more human remains. In the garden of a small house she buried more remains. Among the dirt, investigators later found the skull of a very young child, about 3 years old. They also found more bones from children of different ages, some as young as 3 and some as old as 8. Some of the children who disappeared were never seen again. But Enriqueta kept 2 girls alive in her flat for longer periods. One was a girl named Angelita. The other was a girl named Teresita, whom she took in February of 1912. Teresita was her last victim. She took the girl by the hand, promising her candy, and then forced her to the flat. She cut her hair and changed her name to Felicidad. While the 2 girls were kept in the flat, they did something that was forbidden. One day when Enriqueta was out, they decided to explore the locked rooms. In one room, they found a bag. Inside the bag, there were clothes that were covered in blood. They also found a large knife, also covered in blood. This discovery showed that Enriqueta was continuing to hurt and kill children, even while these 2 girls were living with her. During these years, Enriqueta also kept a list. It was a list of names of important families and rich people in Barcelona. She wrote some of her notes in a secret code, so others could not read them. This list was a record of her wealthy clients. These were the people who paid her for sex with children. These were also the people who bought her horrible remedies made from dead children. Because these people were rich and powerful, they helped protect Enriqueta so she would not be caught and tell the police their names. In late February of 1912, while the 2 girls were still being held in the flat on Caraponent, a neighbor named Claudia Elias became suspicious. Claudia lived in the same building. One day, she looked up and saw a young girl with very short hair looking out from a window on the first floor. Claudia had lived in the building for some time and knew her neighbors. She had never seen this girl before. Claudia went to ask the woman who lived in that flat, Enriqueta Martí, if the girl was hers. Enriqueta simply closed the window without saying a word. This made Claudia even more suspicious. She knew that a little girl named Teresita Guaitart had disappeared from the city about 2 weeks earlier. The whole city was talking about it. Claudia thought the girl in the window might be Teresita. Claudia told her suspicions to a mattress maker who worked on the street. She told him about the strange woman and the girl she had never seen before. The mattress maker then told a local police agent named Jose Asens about what Claudia had said. The agent reported this information to his chief. On February 27, 1912, two police agents went to find Enriqueta. They did not tell her they were investigating a missing child. Instead, they made up a story. They said a neighbor had complained about chickens in her flat. They found her on another street and escorted her back to her flat on Cara Ponent. When they entered the flat, they found two young girls inside. One of them was Teresita Guaitart, the missing child. The other was a girl named Angelita. The police took the two girls and arrested Enriqueta. Teresita was returned to her happy parents. She told them everything that had happened to her. Angelita did not know her real last name. Enriqueta claimed that Angelita was her own daughter. But her estranged husband, Juan Pugelo, came to the police and said this was a lie. He said he had not lived with Enriqueta for years, and they never had any children. It became clear that Angelita was also a kidnapped child. The police returned to the flat to search it more carefully. In the locked room, they found the terrible evidence. They found the bag with the bloody children's clothes and the large knife. They found at least 30 small human bones. These bones looked like they had been burned in a fire. They found the many pitchers and jars filled with human fat, blood, hair, and powdered bones. They also found the pots of creams and bottles of potions already made. The police then searched other places where Enriqueta had lived. They went to a flat on Cara Tallers. They went to another on Cara Picalcs. They went to a small house on Cara Jacques Florals in the Sants neighborhood. In each of these places, they made more discoveries. Behind false walls and inside ceilings, they found more human remains. In the garden of the house on Cara Jacques Florals, they dug up the skull of a 3-year-old child. They also found more bones from other young children. Some of these bones still had pieces of clothing on them. The clothes were poor quality, showing the children came from families with little money. Enriqueta was put in the Reina Amalia prison to wait for her trial. In her flat, police had also found a list of names. It was a list of important families and rich people in Barcelona. The public believed this was a list of her wealthy clients. They believed these rich people had paid her for children to abuse and for the horrible remedies. There was great anger among the people of Barcelona. They wanted Enriqueta to be put on trial and punished. While in prison, Enriqueta tried to kill herself by cutting her wrists with a wooden knife. But she did not succeed. Prison officials made sure she was watched so she could not try again. The public wanted her to face justice. However, Enriqueta Martí was never put on trial for her crimes. On May 12, 1913, she was found dead in the prison. She had been in jail for 1 year and 3 months. The official cause of death on her certificate was uterine cancer, but many people at the time believed she was killed by other prisoners. Some thought these prisoners were paid by her wealthy clients to silence her forever. With her death, all of her secrets died with her. She was buried in a common grave in a cemetery on the mountain of Montjuic in Barcelona. The exact location of her grave is not marked. After her death, some researchers later studied the case and offered different ideas. They said that perhaps Enriqueta was not a killer of many children. They suggested she was a poor, mentally troubled woman who became a scapegoat. They pointed out that she was never formally charged with murder. They noted that some of the bones found might have been taken from cemeteries or were animal bones used for cooking. They also said the blood found could have been her own, as she was sick with uterine cancer which causes bleeding. These researchers believe the story was made larger by newspapers to sell papers and to hide the crimes of rich people who abused children. Despite these later theories, the story at the time was clear. The police found the remains of at least 12 different children. Angelita had witnessed a murder. Teresita had been held captive. Enriqueta Martí had confessed to being a healer who used children to make her remedies. She had also confessed to running a brothel that used children. The case shocked all of Barcelona and became one of the most infamous stories in the city's history. No one knows for sure what happened to all the children who disappeared. Story 5. Kristen Heather Strickland was born on November 13, 1967, in a city called Fall River in Massachusetts. Her father, Richard, worked as an executive for an electronics company. Her mother, Claudia, stayed at home to take care of the family and also worked part-time as a teacher. Kristen was the older of two daughters. When Kristen entered her teenage years, people who knew her began to notice something different about her. She developed a clear pattern of lying to people. She would tell stories that were not true, and this happened often enough that friends and family members saw it as a regular part of her behavior. Another pattern that showed up during her teenage years was the use of fake suicide attempts. Kristen would do things to make it look like she was trying to end her life, but her real goal was to control or influence the people around her. She used these acts to get attention or to get what she wanted from others. Court records later showed that she also made violent threats against other people starting from the time she was a teenager. Kristen went to high school at Groton-Dunstable Regional High School in a town called Groton, Massachusetts. She finished high school there. In 1986, after high school, she enrolled at Bridgewater State College in the town of Bridgewater, Massachusetts. While she was a student at Bridgewater State College, Kristen made another fake suicide attempt. Because of this, the officials at the college took action. They ordered her to get psychiatric treatment. This means she had to see doctors for her mental health. This event caused her to leave Bridgewater State College. In 1987, she moved to a different school. She went to Mount Wachusett Community College in Gardner, Massachusetts. Then, she moved again to another college called Greenfield Community College in Greenfield, Massachusetts. She stayed at Greenfield Community College and finished her studies there. She earned a nursing diploma, which meant she was now qualified to work as a nurse. In 1988, she became a registered nurse. Later that same year, she got married to a man named Glenn Gilbert. She took his last name and became known as Kristen Gilbert. After becoming a nurse, Kristen started working. She did some work as a home health aide before she became a registered nurse. During this time, when she was working as an aide, an incident happened. She deliberately gave a mentally handicapped child a bath using water that was too hot. The water scalded the child, meaning it burned the skin. This happened about 8 years before she would later be involved in more serious crimes at a hospital. In 1989, Kristen Gilbert joined the staff at a hospital. This was the Veterans Affairs Medical Center, which is often called the VAMC, located in Northampton, Massachusetts. She began working there as a nurse. Not long after she started, in April of 1990, she was even featured in a magazine called VA Practitioner, which was a positive recognition for her work. At this point in her life, she was a married woman with a job as a nurse, and she had started her career at the VA hospital. Kristen Gilbert worked as a nurse at the Veterans Affairs Medical Center in Northampton. During her shifts, something unusual began to happen. Patients would suddenly go into cardiac arrest, which means their hearts would stop beating. These medical emergencies happened much more often when Gilbert was on duty than when other nurses were working. The method Gilbert used was always the same. She would take epinephrine, which is also called adrenaline, from the hospital supplies. Epinephrine is a drug that can speed up the heart, but if a person gets too much of it, the heart can stop working correctly. Gilbert would inject large, dangerous amounts of this drug into the intravenous bags, or 4 bags, that were attached to patients. These bags drip medicine or fluids directly into a patient's vein. When the epinephrine went into the patient's body through the 4, it caused the patient to go into cardiac arrest. When a patient's heart stopped, a coded emergency alert would go out through the hospital. Gilbert would then respond to the emergency. Often, she would be the one trying to save the patient and bring them back to life. This made her look like a good nurse who was always there to help in a crisis. One of the reasons she may have done this was to get the attention of a man named James Perot. He worked at the hospital as a police officer. Hospital rules said that a police officer had to be present at every medical emergency. So when Gilbert caused a patient to go into cardiac arrest, James Perot would have to come to that part of the hospital. This gave her a reason to see him and interact with him. The first confirmed victim was a man named Stanley Jagodowski. On a day when Gilbert was working, he went into cardiac arrest and died. The second confirmed victim was Henry Houghton. He also died during one of Gilbert's shifts after his heart stopped. The third confirmed victim was Kenneth Cutting. He died in the same way. The fourth confirmed victim was Edward Squira. He too died of cardiac arrest while Gilbert was on duty. Prosecutors later stated that Gilbert was working at the hospital for about half of the 350 deaths that happened there between 1989 and 1996. Gilbert did not only kill patients, she also attempted to kill others. In November 1995, prosecutors said she tried twice to murder a person by using poison. In January 1996, she tried to poison a patient at the VA hospital. In January 1994, she caused a medical emergency by removing a breathing tube from a patient, which made it hard for the patient to breathe. On November 9, 1995, a patient went into cardiac arrest. Gilbert was there, but she did not help. Instead, she left the patient and asked another nurse to come with her to check on other patients. She waited until the other nurse saw the patient having trouble before she did anything to help. On November 17, 1995, there was another medical emergency. The hospital had a device called a defibrillator, which uses electric shocks to try to restart a heart. Gilbert refused to use this equipment herself. Instead, she forced another nurse who had not been trained to use the defibrillator to do it. This put the patient at greater risk. Other nurses who worked with Gilbert started to notice a pattern. They saw that many patients were dying on the shifts when Gilbert was working. They began to joke about it and called her the Angel of Death. But they did not take action at first because it seemed like a dark joke. In 1996, 3 nurses decided they could no longer ignore what they were seeing. They went to their supervisors and reported their concerns. They pointed out that there had been a large increase in the number of cardiac arrests and deaths. They also noticed that the supply of epinephrine at the hospital was going down much faster than it should have been. The hospital decided to start an investigation into what was happening. When Gilbert learned about the investigation, she took action to try to stop it. She wanted to distract the investigators and cause confusion. So she made a telephone call to the hospital and reported that there was a bomb in the building. This was a false threat. She hoped that the bomb scare would force the hospital to focus on security instead of looking into the deaths. Her plan did not work. The investigation continued. In the middle of the investigation in 1996, Gilbert left her job at the hospital. After she left, she went to psychiatric hospitals 7 times in the fall of that year. She would stay for different lengths of time, from 1 day up to 10 days each time. The bomb threat she had called in was a crime on its own. In January 1998, she went to trial for making that false bomb threat. The people she worked with, including James Perot, testified against her. In April 1998, the court found her guilty of making the bomb threat. She was convicted of that crime. At this point, the investigation into the patient deaths was still going on, and no charges for murder had been filed yet. The investigation into the deaths at the VA hospital continued after Gilbert was convicted of the bomb threat. Federal authorities and police began looking closely at the pattern of deaths that had occurred during Gilbert's shifts. They gathered records and spoke to many people who worked at the hospital. The investigators discovered that Gilbert was on duty for an unusually high number of deaths. Between 1989 and 1996, there were about 350 deaths at the hospital. Gilbert was working during approximately half of those deaths. A statistician looked at these numbers and calculated the probability of one nurse being present for so many deaths by chance alone. The chance was determined to be 1 in 100 million. This meant it was almost impossible that these deaths were natural or coincidental. James Perot, the hospital police officer Gilbert had wanted to impress, spoke to the investigators. He told them that while Gilbert was in a psychiatric hospital, she had called him on the phone. During that phone call, she admitted to him that she had killed at least one person. This testimony became important evidence against her. The investigators also looked back at other incidents from Gilbert's past. They found records showing that before she worked at the VA hospital, when she was a home health aide, she had scalded a mentally handicapped child with hot bath water. This showed a pattern of harming vulnerable people. In 1998, after the bomb threat conviction, the investigation into the murders intensified. The authorities gathered enough evidence to charge Gilbert with multiple counts of murder and attempted murder. The case went to trial in federal court because the crimes happened on federal property at a Veterans Affairs hospital. The trial began in early 2001. The prosecutors presented their evidence to the jury. They showed that Gilbert had access to epinephrine, that the supply of this drug decreased when she was working, and that patients died at much higher rates during her shifts. They brought in witnesses, including other nurses who had noticed the pattern, and James Perot, who testified about her phone confession. The defense lawyers argued that there was no direct evidence linking Gilbert to the deaths. They said no one had actually seen her inject the epinephrine into the 4 bags. They tried to create reasonable doubt in the minds of the jurors. On March 14, 2001, the jury reached their verdict. They found Kristen Gilbert guilty on 3 counts of first-degree murder. They found her guilty on 1 count of second-degree murder. They also found her guilty on 2 counts of attempted murder. The 4 victims she was convicted of killing were Stanley Jagodowski, Henry Huden, Kenneth Cutting, and Edward Squira. Because the crimes occurred on federal property, Gilbert faced the possibility of the death penalty. Federal law allows for execution in serious murder cases. The trial then moved to a second phase where the jury had to decide between life in prison or the death sentence. The prosecutors argued that there were aggravating factors that made the crimes worse. They pointed to her previous conviction for the bomb threat. They also pointed to the fact that she had tried to kill multiple people over several years. The defense lawyers presented mitigating factors. They talked about Gilbert's 2 young sons and what would happen to them if their mother was executed. The jury deliberated on the sentence. On March 26, 2001, they announced their decision. They recommended that Gilbert be sentenced to life in prison instead of the death penalty. The next day, on March 27, 2001, the judge formally sentenced Kristen Gilbert. She received 4 consecutive life sentences, which means she would have to serve 1 life term after another. This guaranteed she would never be released from prison. The judge also added 20 more years to her sentence for the other crimes. After the sentencing, Gilbert was taken to a prison for women in Framingham, Massachusetts. Later, she was transferred to a federal prison called FMC Carswell in Fort Worth, Texas. This is a medical center prison where she has remained since her transfer. In July 2003, Gilbert had the option to appeal her case and ask for a new trial. A new ruling from the United States Supreme Court had created a situation where, if she won a new trial, the prosecutors could once again seek the death penalty. To avoid this risk, Gilbert chose to drop her federal appeal. She accepted her life sentences and stopped trying to fight the conviction. The 4 families of the men she killed were left without their loved ones. The other nurses who had worked with her and reported their concerns were recognized for helping to stop the killings. The hospital made changes to how it tracked medications and deaths to prevent anything like this from happening again. Kristen Gilbert remains in federal prison in Texas, where she will stay for the rest of her life with no chance of ever being released. Story 6. Perry Diane Simpson was born on October 30th, 1962. He did not go home from the hospital with his mother or father. Instead, when he was just 10 days old, the state took custody of him. This happened because his mother had severely abused Perry's older brother. The abuse was so bad that Perry's brother was left blind, deaf, and with permanent brain damage. He had to be put in an institution for the rest of his life. Perry's mother was sent to prison for what she did to her other son. Because of this, Perry entered the foster care system. Foster care is when a child is placed in the care of a family that is paid by the state or in a group home because their own parents cannot look after them. Perry would spend his entire childhood, from 10 days old until he was 18 years old, in this system. Neither of his parents showed any real interest in him. They would not sign papers to let him be adopted by another family. So, Perry was moved from place to place. Over the first 18 years of his life, he was moved 18 different times. He lived with different foster families. Sometimes he lived with relatives for a short while. Other times he lived in institutions. He never had a stable home. He never had a place where he felt he truly belonged. This constant moving made it very hard for him. He could not form close bonds with the people looking after him. He never felt safe or secure. He also had problems in school. He had trouble learning and paying attention. He had a speech problem that made it hard for people to understand him. He also had a skin condition that bothered him. No one gave him the special help he needed for these problems. A social worker named Joan Landreth worked with Perry from the time he was 9 until he was 17. She saw how his unstable life affected him. His mother's mother, his grandmother, lived nearby. She raised Perry's older brother, the one who had been hurt. But she did not want to raise Perry. When Perry was allowed to visit her, she would eventually send him back to the foster care system. This must have been very confusing and painful for him. He saw his brother have a home with their grandmother, but he was not allowed to stay. As Perry grew up, his problems continued. He had a hard time controlling his behavior. He had trouble thinking clearly and understanding things. When he was 21 years old, he was not in school and did not have a job. He was homeless. Around this time, he met a girl named Stephanie Urey. She was 16 years old and pregnant with his child. Perry saw this as his chance to finally have a family of his own, something he had never had. He became very attached to her and emotionally dependent on her. On Sunday, August 26, 1984, Perry Simpson and his girlfriend, Stephanie Urey, were out walking. They had no money. Stephanie was 9 months pregnant, and they were looking for a way to get some cash. They came to a house in Reidsville, North Carolina. It was the home of a 92-year-old man named Gene Ernest Darter. He was a retired Baptist minister. Stephanie went to the front door and rang the bell. When Reverend Darter answered, she told him she was hungry. The elderly man was kind and invited her inside. Perry came in as well. The Reverend gave Stephanie a diet soft drink and gave Perry a glass of milk. He also gave them sponge cake and peaches to eat. Inside, Stephanie made up a story. She told the Reverend that she and Perry were traveling to Florida, but had run out of money and were stuck in Reidsville. Reverend Darter suggested they ask the Salvation Army or the police for help. Stephanie then asked him directly if he could give them some money. The Reverend said he did not have much cash, but he gave her $4. He explained that was all he had in the house. While they were there, Perry asked to use the telephone. He called a woman in Greensboro to try and find his father. While he was on the phone, Stephanie gave the Reverend false names. She said her name was Lisa Marie Johnson, and that Perry's name was Curtis Anthony Parker. Perry watched as Reverend Darter wrote these fake names down on a pad of paper. Before they left, the Reverend also gave them some sponge cake and peaches to take with them. As they walked away, Perry and Stephanie talked about how the preacher had a nice home. The very next day, Monday, August 27th, 1984, Perry and Stephanie talked about going back. They decided they would return to Reverend Darter's house after dark to get more money. They agreed on a plan. They would not come back empty-handed no matter what. They spent time walking around outside, waiting for the sun to go down so they would not be seen. When it was dark, they went to the Reverend's house and rang the doorbell. When Reverend Darter opened the door, they forced their way inside. The elderly man was startled and ran to his telephone to call for help. Perry grabbed him and pulled his hands away from the phone. He told Stephanie to cut the telephone cords, which she did, using something to sever the wires so the Reverend could not call anyone. Perry then forced the 92-year-old man into his bedroom and pushed him down on the bed. He held him down with his hands around his neck and demanded money. Reverend Darter told him he had no more money. He was calm and told Perry that if he was killed, he knew he was going to heaven. This statement made Perry angry. He tightened his grip on the Reverend's throat. Then he saw a belt on the bed. He took it, put it around the Reverend's neck, and pulled it tight. While holding the belt with one hand, he used his other hand to rummage through dresser drawers that Stephanie had already pulled open and dumped onto the bed. He was looking for money or valuables. He kept demanding money, but the Reverend could not answer because he was choking. The first belt broke. Perry took a second, thicker belt and put it around the Reverend's neck. He pulled it tight. He then called out to Stephanie to bring him something he could use to kill the preacher. Stephanie brought him some items, but they were not what he wanted. He told her to come and hold the belt tight while he went to look for a weapon. Perry went into the kitchen. He picked up a full glass soft drink bottle. He decided it was too heavy, so he put it back and picked up an empty one instead. He returned to the bedroom with the empty bottle. He and Stephanie both pulled on the belt to make it even tighter around the victim's neck. Then, Perry took the glass bottle and hit Reverend Darter in the face with it. He hit him hard 3 times. On the third hit, the bottle shattered. Pieces of glass went into the Reverend's eye. A pattern from the bottom of the bottle was imprinted on his cheek. Perry then tied the end of the belt to the bedpost, so the Reverend was held by his neck to the bed. He was not dead yet. Perry went into the bathroom and found a pack of double-edged razor blades. He took one blade and went back to the bedroom. He held the sharp blade between his fingers and cut the Reverend's arms. He cut from the biceps, down the underside of the forearm, all the way to the wrist. He did this to both arms. The cuts were deep and long. While Perry was doing this, Stephanie was gathering things to steal. She packed food from the kitchen, a porcelain lamp, a radio, and several boxes of Kleenex into a plastic laundry basket. They took these items and left the house. Before they left, they turned off all the lights except for one in the bathroom. Reverend Darter was left on his bed, strangled, beaten, and cut, with a belt still tying him to the bedpost. He was dead. The next evening, on Tuesday, August 28th, one of Reverend Darter's daughters, Doris Faircloth, tried to call her father. She could not reach him. She and her husband became worried and drove to his house. When they arrived, they saw only the bathroom light was on. They used a key to get in through the back door. They checked the bathroom, thinking he might have fallen. He was not there. Doris went to the bedroom and saw her father lying across the bed. She knew immediately he was dead. Her husband turned on the light, and they saw the horror of the scene, the belt, the blood, the cuts. The phone lines were cut, so they had to go to a neighbor's house to call the police. When the police arrived, they saw there was no sign of forced entry. They found the cut telephone cords. They found the pad of paper on the kitchen table with the names Lisa Marie Johnson and Curtis Anthony Parker written on it. In the bedroom, they found the broken glass bottle, the razor blade, and the belts. They also found a fingerprint on the telephone that did not belong to the victim. These clues were the first steps toward finding out who had done this. But at that moment, the police did not know who the killers were. The investigation into Reverend Darter's murder began immediately after his body was found on the evening of August 28, 1984. Police officers and agents from the State Bureau of Investigation went through the house carefully. They collected evidence and looked for anything that might tell them who had committed the crime. One of the first things they noticed was the pad of paper on the kitchen table. On it were written the names Lisa Marie Johnson and Curtis Anthony Parker. The police believed these were false names, but they were important clues. They also checked Reverend Darter's telephone bill. The bill showed that a long-distance call had been made from his phone on August 26th, the day before he was killed. The call was to a number in Greensboro. The police traveled to Greensboro and found the person who lived at that address. Her name was Ruby Locklear. They asked her if she knew anyone from Reedsville. She told them that the only person who ever called her from Reedsville was a young man named Perry Diane Simpson. He would call her when he was trying to reach his father. This was the first time the police heard Perry Simpson's name. Back at the crime scene, investigators had lifted fingerprints from various places in the house, including the telephone. They took these fingerprints and compared them to known criminals. They found a match. The fingerprints on Reverend Darter's telephone belonged to Perry Diane Simpson. The police now had two strong pieces of evidence linking Simpson to the crime: the phone call and the fingerprints. They began looking for him. On September 21, 1984, the police learned that there was an outstanding warrant for Perry Simpson's arrest in Greensboro for a simple assault charge that was not related to the murder. That evening, just after 9 p.m., officers went to the home of Stephanie Urie's mother in Reedsville, where they believed Simpson might be. They found him there and arrested him on the assault warrant. Simpson was taken to the Reedsville police station. He was read his rights and agreed to talk to the officers. At first, when they asked him about Reverend Darter's murder, he denied any knowledge. He said he had never met the Reverend and had never been inside his house. He even signed a written statement saying this. The officers did not arrest him for the murder at that time because they did not have enough proof yet. Because the assault warrant was from Guilford County, Simpson had to be taken to a magistrate there to have his bond set. Around midnight, he was driven from Reedsville to Greensboro, arriving at the Greensboro police station about 1:30 a.m. on September 22nd. Before he was taken to a magistrate, officers asked if they could talk to him some more about the Reedsville murder. Simpson agreed. He was told he could see the magistrate first if he wanted to, but he chose to speak with the officers. During this questioning, an officer explained a polygraph test to Simpson and asked if he would take one. Simpson agreed. The officer explained how the machine could tell if a person was lying. At that point, Simpson indicated that the machine would show he was lying. He then asked to use the phone to try to reach his father, but he was unsuccessful. After getting a cup of coffee, Simpson began to confess. Starting at around 2:44 a.m., Simpson gave a full oral confession to the murder of Reverend Darter. He then agreed to give a written statement. The officers wrote down what he said, and the process took several hours. Simpson read the statement out loud, made corrections, and signed it at around 5:30 a.m. In his 16-page confession, he explained everything that had happened on August 26th and August 27th. He admitted that Reverend Darter had been kind to them, giving them food and money, and that they had planned to go back and rob him. He described in detail how he had strangled the Reverend with belts, beaten him with a bottle, and cut his arms with a razor blade. After the confession was signed, warrants were issued for Simpson's arrest for first-degree murder, robbery, and conspiracy. Perry Simpson pleaded guilty to all charges: first-degree murder, robbery with a dangerous weapon, and conspiracy to commit murder. Because he pleaded guilty to murder, a jury was chosen to decide his punishment. In March 1985, that jury recommended the death penalty, and the judge sentenced him to death. Stephanie Urie, who was 16 at the time of the crime, was also tried and found guilty. Because of her age and her role in the crime, she was sentenced to life in prison. However, the case did not end there. Simpson's lawyers appealed his death sentence. They argued that errors had been made during the sentencing part of his trial. The North Carolina Supreme Court agreed. In 1987, they said that the trial judge had made a mistake by not allowing both of Simpson's lawyers to speak to the jury during the final arguments. They overturned the death sentence, but left his guilty plea in place. This meant a new jury had to be chosen for a second sentencing hearing, just to decide on the punishment again. That second sentencing hearing was held, and once again, the jury recommended the death penalty. Simpson's lawyers appealed again. In 1992, the North Carolina Supreme Court overturned the death sentence a second time. They found that the judge had given the jury a wrong instruction about how they had to consider evidence that might have led them to give a life sentence instead of death. The case was sent back for a third sentencing hearing. In 1993, a third jury was chosen. They heard all the evidence again, including details of Simpson's difficult childhood in foster care and the brutal nature of the murder. This jury, like the two before it, recommended a sentence of death. This time, when Simpson's lawyers appealed, the North Carolina Supreme Court found no errors. In 1995, they upheld the death sentence. Over the next 10 years, Simpson's lawyers filed more appeals in other courts, including federal courts, but all of them were rejected. On January 20, 2006, more than 21 years after the murder, Perry Diane Simpson was executed by lethal injection at Central Prison in Raleigh. He was 43 years old. His last meal was a McRib sandwich from McDonald's, a double cheeseburger from Wendy's, macaroni and cheese, cheesecake, and a Pepsi. His final words were an apology. He said, "I want to say I am sorry for what I did. I'm sorry for the victim and the families. I'm sorry for my family. I'm sorry for everybody. I want to say to Stephanie, I'm sorry for what happened to you. I wish you'd get out and make a life for yourself. May God bless everyone." Several members of Reverend Darter's family witnessed the execution. Afterward, they released a statement saying they respected the legal process that had been carefully carried out by 3 different juries. They said they were not looking for sympathy, but honoring the memory of their grandfather, a kind and gentle man. Perry Simpson was pronounced dead at 2:17 a.m., bringing a final close to a case that had taken over 2 decades to resolve. Stephanie Uri remains in prison serving her life sentence. Story 7. Bertha Alice Williams was born on October 30th, 1871, in a small place called Morse Mill, Missouri. Her father was William Poindexter Williams, and her mother was Matilda Williams. Bertha was not an only child. She grew up in a large family with 9 brothers and sisters. Her childhood was simple and busy, as life on a farm in those days meant lots of work for everyone. When she became a young woman, Bertha got married for the first time. Her first husband's name was Henry Graham. After they married, Bertha became a farm wife. This meant she took care of the house, the garden, and the family. Bertha and Henry had 1 daughter together. They named her Lila. Life seemed normal for the family. Bertha learned the skills a farm wife needed, like cooking, cleaning, and preserving food. She became known in her small community for being a very good cook. People enjoyed the meals she made. After some time, her husband Henry Graham passed away. This was a difficult event in her life. She was now a widow with a young daughter to raise. But she did not stay alone for long. She married a second time. Her new husband was a man named Eugene Gifford. After this marriage, she was known as Bertha Gifford. Eugene and Bertha had 1 child together, a son named James. So Bertha now had 2 children, Lila and James, to look after. The family lived in a rural area near Catawissa, Missouri. It was a small, close-knit farming community where everyone knew each other. Bertha continued her life as a wife and mother. She was known as a kind and helpful neighbor. When people in the community got sick, Bertha was often the one who would go to their houses to help. She would cook for them, clean their homes, and care for them while they were ill. This was a common thing in small towns, where there were no hospitals nearby and doctors were far away. Bertha was seen as a very caring person. She was good at making sick people feel comfortable. Her reputation as a caregiver grew. Over the years, many people in the area became ill, and Bertha was there to nurse them back to health. However, a strange pattern began to form. Sometimes the people she cared for did not get better. Sometimes they died. Because she was so kind and helpful, no one thought badly of her. If a sick person died, people simply believed their illness was too strong. They felt sorry for Bertha, who had tried so hard to save them. Death was a common part of life in those times, so people did not ask many questions. They just accepted it. Her life continued in this way for many years. She was a busy farm wife, a mother, and the community's trusted nurse. No one suspected that anything was wrong. Her past was just the normal life of a woman in rural Missouri, filled with work, family, and helping neighbors in need. As the years passed, Bertha Gifford continued her role as the person who cared for the sick in her community near Catawissa. Her kindness was well known. When a neighbor or a relative fell ill, Bertha would arrive at their home with food and medicine. She would sit with them for hours. But over time, a very clear pattern began to appear. 5 different people became sick, and Bertha came to care for them. All 5 of those people ended up dying while under her care. This did not go unnoticed by everyone. A few people in the small town began to talk quietly among themselves. They noticed that a lot of people who got sick and had Bertha as a nurse did not survive. The number of deaths seemed too high to be just bad luck. The talk grew louder until it reached the ears of the local authorities. The situation became serious enough that a grand jury was called to look into what was happening. A grand jury is a group of citizens who decide if there is enough evidence for a case to go to court. This happened because of the 5 deaths that had occurred while Bertha was acting as a nurse. To find out the truth, the authorities made a decision. They decided to dig up the bodies of 3 people who had died. These people were Edward Brinley and 2 young men named Elmer Schammel and Lloyd Schammel. The bodies were taken to a place where a doctor could examine them. This is called an autopsy. The doctor performed tests on the remains of the 3 people. The results were very clear. The bodies of Edward Brinley, Elmer Schammel, and Lloyd Schammel all contained a large amount of a poison. The poison was arsenic. Arsenic is a powerful poison that was sometimes used in small amounts in old medicines, but it was also used to kill rats. The large amounts found in the bodies were enough to kill a person. Once this evidence was found, the police took action. In the year 1928, they arrested Bertha Gifford. She was not at her home near Catawissa when they found her. She was actually in a town called Eureka, Missouri. They formally charged her with 3 counts of murder. The charges were for the deaths of Edward Brinley, Elmer Schammel, and Lloyd Schammel, the 3 people whose bodies had shown the poison. After her arrest, the case was prepared for trial. The trial was held in a town called Union, Missouri. The courtroom was filled with people from the small community who had known Bertha for years. They could not believe that the kind woman who had brought them soup was now accused of killing people. The trial lasted for 3 days. The main evidence against her was the arsenic found in the bodies of the 3 victims. The prosecution argued that she had poisoned them. Bertha Gifford's lawyers did not argue that she was innocent of the acts. Instead, they presented a different argument. They said that Bertha Gifford was not guilty because she was insane. They told the court that she did not understand what she was doing when she gave the poison to the victims. They said her mind was not right. The jury listened to all the evidence and the arguments from both sides. After 3 days, they came to a decision. They found Bertha Gifford not guilty by reason of insanity. This meant the jury believed she had committed the acts, but she was mentally ill at the time and could not be held responsible like a normal person. Because of this verdict, she was not sent to a prison. Instead, the judge gave a different order. She was to be sent to a place called the Missouri State Hospital No. 4. This was not a hospital for regular sickness. It was a psychiatric institution, a place where people with mental illnesses were sent to live and be cared for. After the trial ended, Bertha Gifford was taken away from the courthouse. She was brought to the Missouri State Hospital No. 4. This was a large facility in a town called Farmington, Missouri. It was built to hold people who were found to be insane. For Bertha, this place would become her new home. She was no longer a farm wife in her small community. She was now a patient in a mental hospital. The hospital was very different from her life in Catawissa. She lived in a large building with many other patients. Her days were structured by the hospital's rules. She ate her meals in a large dining hall with others. She slept in a room that was not her own. The staff at the hospital watched over her and the other patients. They made sure she took her medicine and followed the daily schedule. She was not free to leave. The gates of the hospital were locked. While Bertha lived out her days in the hospital, the story of her crimes did not completely fade away in the outside world. People in the communities around Catawissa and Union still remembered the deaths. They remembered the trial. The grand jury that had first looked into the 5 deaths had also heard rumors about many other deaths. People talked about how Bertha had cared for sick neighbors and relatives for years. They began to count. They realized that over the many years she had acted as a nurse, a total of 17 people had died while in her care. This number was far higher than the 5 that led to the investigation. It was also much higher than the 3 she was tried for. The authorities looked into these older cases. They heard stories about an additional 12 deaths that people suspected might be connected to Bertha. But there was a big problem. These deaths had happened many years before. The bodies had been buried for a long time. In some cases, the graves were very old. It was too late to dig up the bodies and test them for poison. The evidence was gone. Without being able to examine the bodies, the police could not prove that poison was involved. Because they could not prove it, they could not file new charges against Bertha. She was already in the hospital, and the cases from long ago were left unsolved. So for many years, Bertha remained a patient at the Missouri State Hospital No. 4. She grew old within its walls. The outside world moved on without her. Her children, Lila and James, lived their own lives. The small town of Catawissa continued on. But Bertha stayed in the hospital year after year. She never left. She lived there for more than 2 decades. On August 20th, 1951, Bertha Alice Williams Graham Gifford died. She was inside the hospital when she passed away. She was 79 years old. Her death marked the end of her long stay in the institution. Because she had been found insane and sent to the hospital, she never spent a single day in a prison. After her death, the questions about the other deaths remained. Because there was no proof, it was never certain how many people she had actually harmed. The case was closed, but the full truth of what happened in those small farmhouses went with her to her grave.